بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تنزيل الكتاب من الله العزيز الحكيم إنا أنزلنا إليك الكتاب بالحق فاعبد الله مخلصا له الدين.
آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, the dars will be only 30 minutes, inshallah. 30 minutes, inshallah. So that shuruq is before that. So 30 minutes, the dars, inshallah. And we're in Surah Az-Zumar, and verse number 69. Surah Az-Zumar, verse number 69. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all al-ikhlas and to accept our deeds. And these are we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this majalis, or gatherings, is majalis of the Quran, which is the best thing for a person to be present. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِذَا مَرَرْتُمْ بِرِيَاضِ الْجَنَّةِ فَارْتَعُوا. If you pass by the gardens of Jannah, فَارْتَعُوا, that means when a person is in a garden, or the animals were in a huge place where they can eat, and then they can go everywhere and enjoy. So what is this Riyadul Jannah? Majalis al-Dhikr. As the Prophet ﷺ, he was asked about it, he said, Riyadul Jannah, Hilaq al-Dhikr. The circles of dhikr. And Hilaq al-Dhikr is not just to sit and to say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, and so on. As Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anhu, when he mentioned this hadith, no one knows the explanation of the hadith better than the Sahaba, radiallahu anhu. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anhu, when he mentioned this hadith, he said, أما إني لا أعني القصاص ولكن حلق الفقه. He says, I don't mean by this the circles of the qussas, the storytellers, rather the hilaq of al-fiqh, the hilaq where a person would get to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him, the halal, the haram. And as one of the early generations of al-Islam, Abu Sawar al-Adawi, when he was giving a dars, matters of ilm, and a young person says, say Subhanallah Alhamdulillah. So he got angry at him, and he said, وَيْحَكْ بِأَيِّ شَيْءٍ كُنَّا إِذًا. Woe to you, what are we doing then? We are making the tasbih and the tahmeed and the takbir by learning the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the best gatherings, is the gatherings where a person get to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So ayah number 69, I'll recite inshallah. Just that one verse, and then we'll see if we have time inshallah, or the two verses. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأشرقت الأرض بنور ربها ووضع الكتاب وجيء بالنبيين والشهداء وقضي بينهم بالحق وهم لا يظلمون ووفيت كل نفس ما عملت وهو أعلم بما يفعلون. The first ayah, the translation, and the earth will shine with the light of its Lord, and the record of deeds will be placed, and the prophets and the witnesses will be brought, and it will be judged between them in truth, and they will not be wronged. So this is continuation of what is going to be in the day of judgment. And after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the surah mentioned that the mulk of Allah, the dominion of the heavens and the earth, all belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the sovereignty of the heavens and the earth all to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. له مقاليد السماوات والأرض. Everything is owned by Allah, and He's the one that is in charge of all of this. He's the King subhanahu wa ta'ala in matters of this worldly life. And then the verses talked about the same thing in the hereafter, that He subhanahu wa ta'ala malikul mulki in the day of judgment, and with the punishment and with the rewards. So the previous verses talked about the nafkh of sur and the gatherings of the people in the day of resurrection. So this is continuing with the same meaning. وَأَشْرَقَتِ الْأَرْضُ بِنُورِ رَبِّهَا. Al-Ard is the earth, and as we will see later in the verses, that al-ard doesn't necessarily mean this earth that we live on, but it's anything that people are on or upon. That's why even the Jannah, or the floor of the Jannah, the ground of the Jannah, is called earth. It's called Ard. So al-Ard is what the foot will step on, not necessarily. This depends on the context, of course. So أشرقت الأرض بنور ربها. He says, Imam السعدي رحمه الله, علم من هذا أن الأنوار الموجودة تذهب يوم القيامة وتضمحل. He says, علم من هذا, it's to be known from this as a result of this verse, or this part of the verse, the mafhum, the understanding of it, that all of the lights that are present will all go away in the day of Al-Qiyamah. وتضمحل, it's going to be perished, removed. All the lights. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the lights of the sun, and the moon gets from the sun. All of that will disappear. Understanding from this verse. وهو كذلك, and this is the case. فإن الله أخبر أن الشمس تكور والقمر. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed, as we heard in the salah, إذا الشمس كورت, that the sun will تكور, will be rounded and will be thrown into the fire. That means it won't have its light anymore. والقمر, the same thing for the moon. يخسف, will be removed. والنجوم تنتثر, نجوم انتثرت, also it will be not there anymore. ويكون الناس في ظلمة. So the human beings will be in complete darkness. There's no light whatsoever. فتشرق عند ذلك الأرض بنور ربها. Then here at this moment the earth will be lit by the light of its Lord. And وأشرقت الأرض, الإشراق in our life is when the sun rises. It is not the sunrise. The word, when you say al-ishraq or ashraqat al-shams, is not the rise of the sun. It's the light that spreads on the face of earth. So this is what al-ishraq means, not the sun rises. Right? So it's وَأَشْرَقَتِ الْأَرْضُ, that means the earth will be filled with the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the light of the Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَتُشْرِقُ عِنْدَ ذَلِكَ. So the word tushriq will be lit, the light will be all over, بِنُورِ رَبِّهَا, by the light of its Lord. And this is one of the characters, one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that nothing is the like of Allah. No one knows how this light will be. No one. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, الله نور السماوات والأرض بنور ربها عندما يتجلى وينزل للفصل بينهم. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to judge between the people in the day of judgment, everything will be lit by the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وذلك اليوم, and as we know also from the hadith that the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, when he reached in the night of Al-Mi'raj, a place where no human being had reached, and when he was asked عليه الصلاة والسلام, did you see your Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Then he said, نور أن أرى. He said, nur, light. I saw light. أن أرى, how can I see him? Meaning no one is allowed to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life, only in the hereafter. And the hijab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a nur. The hijab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the light. So he says, وذلك اليوم يجعل الله للخلق قوة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make for the creation of Allah on that day قوة, strength, power, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they will face and be able to sustain things. They won't be able to sustain it in this life. The fact that they will be living forever, no death for anyone once they are resurrected. وينشئهم نشأة يقوون على ألا يحرقهم نوره. And he would initiate them, create them in such a way that the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not burn them, because that's what's mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remove that hijab, لأحرقت سبحات وجهه ما ينتهي إليه بصره من خلقه. That if the hijab is removed, everything will be burned by what the last thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sight falls on. That means everything, because of the light of Allah. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them the ability to sustain the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَتَمَكَّنُونَ أَيْضًا مِنْ رُؤْيَتِهِ. Also they will have the ability to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is for the believers. وَإِلَّا, otherwise, فَنُورُهُ تَعَالَى عَظِيمٌ. The light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is azim, is great. No one can comprehend the essence of it and how great it is. لو كشفه, as here now he mentioned it, what's mentioned in the hadith, if he subhanahu wa ta'ala removes this hijab which is between him and his creation, لأحرقت سبحات وجهه ما انتهى إليه بصره من خلقه, as the hadith in Sahih Muslim, as it's mentioned also in the footnote. He says وأشرقت الأرض بنور ربها ووضع الكتاب. ووضع الكتاب, and the book is being put, and this is, what is the book here? كتاب الأعمال وديوانه. The book of deeds will be present, will be established. وضع ونشر. It will be put, and الوضع is when you put something on something. So it will be brought. ونشر, it will be opened. ليقرأ أو ليقرأ ما فيه من الحسنات والسيئات. For the hasanat and the sayyat, these are the a'mal, will be read from the book of al-a'mal. وَوُضِعَ الْكِتَابِ. So at the end, after this life, each and every one of us is nothing but what's in the book. And what's in the book is what's this life is about, is the place of amal, darul amal, only a'mal, nothing else. And that's why the ulama, when they talked about the things that is not considered by some as amal, a person is sleeping, eating, sitting, doing nothing, how's that going to be recorded in the book? Since everything is going to be there, the a'mal. Is it only the good deeds versus the bad deeds as it's specified in the Quran and the Sunnah, or everything? This is something that both have both evidences on both sides. But it shows the importance of not wasting even a second in one's life, because the sleep and the food and the drink and resting, all of that, it's, if it helps the person to establish the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is in the balance of the good deeds, inshallah ta'ala. So, and it all goes with one's intentions and following the way the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So, وَوُضِعَ الْكِتَابِ ليقرأ ما فيه من الحسنات والسيئات كما قال تعالى, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, ووضع الكتاب فترى المجرمين مشفقين مما فيه ويقولون يا ويلتنا ما لهذا الكتاب لا يغادر صغيرة ولا كبيرة إلا أحصاها ووجدوا ما عملوا حاضرا ولا يظلم ربك أحدا. ووضع الكتاب, as it's mentioned in Surah Al-Isra, فترى المجرمين, the مجرمين, the criminal ones, you will see them مشفقين مما فيه. Al-Ishfaq, as we said, Al-Ishfaq before, is mixture of grief with worries. Someone that if he thinks of his future and he's worried, so he become a little bit sad. So, but it's not sadness what is meant by here. So in the day of judgment, the mujrimeen, the criminal ones, when they see their book, imagine someone seeing his book, is that he is going to be in hellfire forever. Nothing in it except kufr and shirk and associating partners with Allah. So مشفقين مما فيه, being terrified of what's in their books. ويقولون, and they would say يا ويلتنا, they would say woe to us, ما لهذا الكتاب لا يغادر صغيرة ولا كبيرة إلا أحصاها. And this is where some said everything will be recorded in the book, because they say what's the matter with this book does not leave any small or big unless it's counted for and it's present in that book. ووجدوا ما عملوا حاضرا, and they would find what they've done present. So the book of deeds, this is the amal, then it's present in the day of judgment in front of them. أحصاه الله ونسوه, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أحصاه, counted it, all it's present, and they forgot. We forget what we did yesterday, right? So everything is recorded, nothing is forgotten, and they would see what they've done. ولا يظلم ربك أحدا, and your Lord would never do any injustice to anyone whatsoever. So all of the ayat that talks about the kitab and the mizan of the a'mal and the hadith, this is something that needs to be also reflected upon. ووضع الكتاب ويقال للعامل من تمام العدل والإنصاف. It will be said to the amil, to the human being, to the doer of that he did in his life, out of the perfect justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fairness, اقرأ كتابك, read your own book. This is your own book. And as is well established in the Quran, that those who will be thrown in the hellfire, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, they won't blame anyone except their own selves. They would blame one another as a way of cursing one another, but they would never see except the perfect justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, اقرأ كتابك, you read your own book. That means this is your choice, this is your actions. And we are in the process of having and adding what's in our books. And this is how the effect of these verses in our life. And one day the book will be closed, and that is the moment of death. And the Prophet ﷺ also, he said that when a person dies, the book is closed, except for the three cases as we know. So اقرأ كتابك, and that's the continuous actions after one's life, and one of which is the ilm, one of which is a righteous son to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and صدقة جارية, and a continuous charity. So اقرأ كتابك كفى بنفسك اليوم عليك حسيب. Sufficient is for you on that day, you as hasib, as you are the one that would count for yourself, because the matter is very clear, and more of that is mentioned in the Quran, and even their mouth will be sealed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will command their parts of their body to speak. All of these things is established. So ووضع الكتاب وجيء بالنبيين, and the prophets will be brought. وَجِيءَ بِالنَّبِيِّينَ, they will be brought, the prophets, because they are the ones that were between the people and their Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the hisab and the reckoning is according to what the prophets alayhimus salam came with. وَيَوْمَ يُنَادِيهِمْ فَيَقُولُ مَاذَا أَجَبْتُمُ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. On the day when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call them, and he would say, how did you respond to the mursaleen, to your messengers? Our messenger, the messenger of all of the human beings since he was sent, the Prophet ﷺ was sent to all mankind. Every messenger will be, his people will be asked about him. And the Prophet ﷺ was sent to all mankind, so they will be asked about him. They will be asked about the Prophet ﷺ, and they will be asked about why didn't you, or you did follow the Prophet ﷺ, and people are in many different levels with this. So ijabatul mursaleen, to respond to the message, is to learn it and to act upon it. So وَجِيءَ بِالنَّبِيِّينَ لِيُسْأَلُوا, the prophets will be asked. لِيَسْأَلَ الصَّادِقِينَ عَنْ صِدْقِهِمْ, the truthful ones will be asked. So imagine the ones that are not truthful. لِيُسْأَلُوا عَنِ التَّبْلِيغ, the prophets will be asked in front of humanity, did they convey the message? وَعَنْ أُمَمِهِمْ, they will be asked about their nations. وَيَشْهَدُوا عَلَيْهِمْ فَكَيْفَ إِذَا جِئْنَا, and they will witness for them or against them. فكيف إذا جئنا من كل أمة بشهيد وجئنا بك على هؤلاء شهيدا يومئذ يود الذين كفروا وعصوا الرسول لو تسوى بهم الأرض ولا يكتمون الله حديثا. The meaning is, as the ayah in Surah An-Nisa, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud when he was reciting this to him, he said, recite to me the Quran. He said, O Prophet of Allah, I recite to you the Quran when it was revealed unto you. He said, I love to listen to the Quran from someone else. So he recited from Surah An-Nisa till he reached this verse. The Prophet ﷺ, he said to him, Hasbuk, stop. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud looked at the Prophet ﷺ, and his eyes was shedding tears. Why? Because the ayah says that when we brought everyone on the Day of Judgment, and you will be witness basically for them or against them in the Day of Judgment. وَجِئْنَا بِكَ عَلَى هَؤُلَاءِ شَهِيدًا. He will witness for or against the human beings in the Day of Judgment, and even for the nations before. Because the nations before the prophets had informed them of the coming of the Prophet ﷺ. So وَجِئَ بِالنَّبِيِّينَ, and to be asked about التبليغ وعن أممهم ويشهدوا عليهم والشهداء, and the witnesses. Here the witnesses من الملائكة والأعضاء والأرض. These things are mentioned in other verses in the Quran, but because to be brief here, what are the witnesses in the Day of Judgment? The angels will witness, because they spend their entire life of that human being recording everything. And every time a person has two angels, one is recording the good deeds and one is recording the bad deeds. We're not left alone like this. So the angels, wal a'da, and the physical bodies of the human being, as it's mentioned in Surah Fussilat. It will witness against the disbelievers and so on. Wal ard, and the earth. Inna naktubu ma qaddamu wa atharahum. The earth will speak and will witness for or against the spot that a person committed a sin on. This earth is created so that people worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on it, not to spread corruption on the face of earth. So the earth will, the spot of the places where people committed sins, committed atrocities, evil, it will witness against the person as a result of that. And this is, the more of that is to show the perfect justice of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He will, and punish all of who deserve to be punished, no one will question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's Malik al-Mulk, Malik Yawm al-Din. But this is for the human beings to see the perfect justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of how all of these things will be brought, and the matter will be established with the perfect justice and the perfect mercy of Allah. وَجِيءَ بِالنَّبِيِّينَ وَالشُّهَدَاءِ وَقُضِيَ بَيْنَهُم بِالْحَقِّ. And it will be judged between them in the truth and by the truth. أي العدل التام والقسط العظيم. The complete justice and the perfect justice from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لأنه, why this is perfect? لأنه حساب صادر ممن لا يظلم مثقال ذرة. Because this hisab, this reckoning and this judgment is coming from the one that does not do any injustice, even the weight of a mustard seed. He's the creator of the heavens and the earth, and he's the most just subhanahu wa ta'ala. The justice of Allah also as an attribute of Allah beyond what people think of justice. So we need to quit thinking of how is the justice of Allah is going to be in the day of judgment when people will be punished. This is beyond what a person can even comprehend, because the one that created justice in us to think is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his justice is beyond what a person understands. So he's the most just subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we are so limited with whatever just is revealed to us. So لأنه حساب صادر ممن لا يظلم مثقال ذرة ومن هو محيط بكل شيء. And the justice is established when he subhanahu wa ta'ala encompasses everything. Even when a human being is as a judge. To be a judge is not just to listen to one side of the story, for example, and not just listening to both sides of the story. The person has to have the knowledge, and he has to have the ability to encompass most of what is being said, and the environment and the circumstances and the rulings and the ahkam and so on. Not just anyone can be a judge. And that's why many of the Salaf al-Salih, great Imam, would run away from it. Like Imam Abi Hanifa and others, they won't want to be judges. Sufyan al-Thawri, he ran away, fled like this, like homeless, so that they don't go after him to make him a judge, which is one of the highest prestigious positions. They would run away from it because this is a heavy responsibility. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge among the people in the day of judgment. And he subhanahu wa ta'ala محيط بكل شيء وكتابه, and his book الذي هو اللوح المحفوظ. اللوح المحفوظ محيط بكل ما عملوا, encompasses everything that they did. Everything is recorded. والحفظة الكرام, and the angels, those who recorded everything. الذين لا يعصون ربهم, those who do not disobey, they don't disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قد كتبت عليهم ما عملوا, recorded everything that the people did. وأعدل الشهداء, see, all of these things are the means of justice. وأعدل الشهداء, and the most just of witnesses. قد شهدوا على ذلك الحكم, they witnessed for the hukm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فحكم بذلك من يعلم مقادير الأعمال, so he made the ruling and the verdict, the one that knows the measurements of أعمال and actions. ومقادير استحقاقها, and the measure of who deserves للثواب والعقاب, how much thawab, how much punishment. People are not all on the same level of things. All of that is by the perfect justice of Allah. فيحصل حكم يقر به الخلق, so the hukm from Allah. Allah Azza wa Jal يحكم لا معقب لحكمه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rules, gives the judgment. No one is to change the hukm of Allah. So once the hukm is established in the day of judgment, so and so in Jannah, so and so in Fire, hukmun yuqirru bihi al-khalq. All of the khalq will make the iqrar, they acknowledge it, they humble themselves to it, they submit themselves to it. وَيَعْتَرِفُونَ لِلَّهِ بِالْحَمْدِ وَالْعَدْلِ. And they would, al-i'tiraf is to confess, is to express the perfect praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and justice, and that's even from the disbelievers, those who will be punished in the day of judgment. ويعرفون به من عظمته وعلمه وحكمته ورحمته ما لم يخطر بقلوبهم ولا تعبر عنه ألسنتهم. And they would get to know from the azama, the exaltation of Allah and His knowledge and His wisdom and His mercy, what never crossed their hearts, and their tongues were never able to express this. So when someone hears this, this is something that no one will be able to comprehend it in this life. But what is our job in this life? We don't have to get the essence of it, but we've been given what's going to happen. What we have been commanded is to be ibad to Allah, is to fulfill the ubudiyyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and knowing that nothing is the like of Allah, that He is the most just subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most merciful, and He commanded us to do certain things, forbade us from certain things, then to fulfill the commands of Allah and to be steadfast upon the deen of Allah. So as the ayah clearly states, and if we reflect upon every aspect here, it's all the perfect justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَشْرَقَتِ الْأَرْضُ بِنُورِ رَبِّهَا ووضع الكتاب. This is again the book of Al-A'mal. وجيء بالنبيين. And what he mentioned here in the tafsir, this is what Abdullah ibn Abbas رضي الله عنهما he said, يشهدون على الأمم بأنهم بلغوهم رسالات الله إليه. They would witness against their nations, we had conveyed the message, and that's what the Prophet ﷺ also said in Hajjat al-Wada'. والشهداء, the angels, those who recorded the deeds of the people. وقضي بينهم بالحق, here by the justice. وهم لا يظلمون, they would never be treated with injustice. ونضع الموازين القسط ليوم القيامة. So then the next ayah, ووفيت كل نفس ما عملت وهو أعلم بما يفعلون, and every soul will be fully compensated for what it did, and he is most knowing of what they do. He says ولهذا قال ووفيت كل نفس ما عملت وهم لا يظلمون, and he did not mention a tafsir for this ayah, because all of what's mentioned here, then that's the outcome. ووفيت كل نفس ما عملت. And وفيت, that means it will be given for full, in full, what it deserved from actions. And الوفاء or التوفية is when you give something وافيا لا نقص فيه. That means something has been given full, without anything less whatsoever, no deficiency, no less than what they deserve, which is less than the justice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained. So ووفيت كل نفس, every soul will be given in full ما عملت, what it did, the أعمال, which is as mentioned in the previous verse, وهم لا يظلمون, and they would never be treated with any injustice. So this is the tafsir of وقضي بينهم بالحق وهم لا يظلمون. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وهو أعلم بما يفعلون, as also it's mentioned, he knows best what they've done. So as you see here, أشرقت ووضع وجاء ووفيت ونفخ. Like, this is how all in the past tense, and it's going to be established, because this is what's in the Day of Judgment as an everlasting life. And all of that is mentioned to warn the disbelievers, and that's why the next verses talks about the disbelievers first, because this is what fits the admonition to the hearts, to have the warnings, and then the believers will be mentioned. And this is what the surah is called Surah Az-Zumar, because وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى جَهَنَّمَ زُمَرًا and وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا رَبَّهُمْ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ زُمَرًا. They will be brought to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in groups. And this is how the groups is not according to timeline or places where people lived, nationalism or race, or they won't be gathered by their race or by their people or by their citizenship or anything like this. They will be gathered according to al-kufr wal-iman. This is the two groups. وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, and those verses, those who feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and were obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we will read in that inshallah ta'ala next time, inshallah ta'ala. But Zumar is also shows that this is they're grouped by their purpose of their life. So the kufr and the iman. And the word Zumar is always mentioned. It's only understood when a group follows another group. So you can't say for a group of people traveling alone like this, one group, you can't call them Zumar. You can't call a group by itself like this Zumaran. It has to be a group followed by another group. So it gives that meaning of they follow one another. So Zumara, one group after the other. Whether it's according to the levels of disbelief, things of that nature. Messengers of Allah, the people of every messenger. So this is how they will be. And the same thing for those who feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They will be gathered according to the levels of deeds. And this is the perfect justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brings the tranquility in the heart for the believers. No one will be treated with injustice. And one of the most unpleasant feeling in this life is when someone is oppressed. But this is only a test in this life. And nothing will prevail forever when it comes to injustice. The justice will be brought, if it's not in this life, then in the hereafter. And it's definitely one of the ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this life, that the perfect justice is never established on the face of earth. How many people, they die being oppressed and being treated with injustice. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just. And this is one of the things, there is the signs, clear signs of the Day of Judgment. How can someone believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he thinks that things will be left like this, to be the way that people see what's on the face of earth? People are oppressed and weak and treated with injustice, and people are spreading corruption. And then they all end their lives, some of them in a normal way, and some of them they live till they're 100 years old. Then they spend all of their life in spreading corruption in the face of earth. And this is accusing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of being unjust. But when people don't understand the wahy from Allah, they think that it has to be served in this life. No, it doesn't. And it would never be like this in the perfect sense. And that's why this perfect justice is mentioned in the day of judgment. And this is the everlasting punishment or rewards. And also as one of the great meanings of when someone think that it's only counted years on the face of earth and the punishment is an everlasting one. Yes, because the crimes that are committed and the justice in the perfect sense is not done in this life by the human beings, and the warnings is there. So that's why the punishment is an everlasting one for those who die وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ in the state of kufr. So we'll continue inshallah ta'ala Monday inshallah. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. And the attendance code is وأشرقت الأرض. وأشرقت الأرض is the attendance code. And there's a question, was it Mu'adh ibn Jabal that said, take my daily qaylula so that I can wake up for tahajjud, so therefore my sleep becomes an act of ibadah? Yes, the statement of Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, إني لا أحتسب نومتي كما أحتسب قومتي. He said, I seek rewards from Allah when I sleep, the same way I seek rewards from Allah when I get up. Because you seek rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you sleep so that he can wake up to continue the ibadah, to continue to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The same thing for every matter. A person waking up to go seek provisions, right? This is seeking rewards from Allah so that he can worship Allah. This is means, the worship of Allah is a goal. Someone wants to get married, marriage is a mean, not an objective. A mean to establish the deen of Allah. Food, drink, sleeping, resting, relationships, and there's ahkam that is related to it, so it's also part of establishing the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by following the way the Prophet ﷺ. Also the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when my servant asks, tell him I am near, وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان. I answer the call of the caller when he calls, so he should answer my call and believe in me so that he may have mercy. Is this answering the call, the messengers and for us of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Yes, of course. وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان فليستجيبوا لي. الاستجابة, and the ayah talks about the dua, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and فليستجيبوا لي, responding to the call. إن سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا. When we heard the caller of Al-Iman, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to believe in Allah, we believed. So, يا الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم. We who believe, استجيبوا, respond to the call from Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam when He invites you to what is the real life, the life of Al-Iman and the everlasting life in the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why without answering the call, there is no dua is to be accepted. A person has to follow the message of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Anything else? Right. That's what al-ishraq means. That's why even al-ishraq, for example, the salah is after the sun rises in a way that it's the qayda rumh, where the light becomes widespread. But it's also can be used, referring to the sunrise, because when the sunrise, the light spread, even if there's clouds. But if you go deep to the root meaning of it, it's the spread of the light and not the actual sunrise. Anything else? سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك.